So I cannot really support you making your localization into base Odoo, but at least I can give you a story, or actually two stories, of what is it like to work on an accounting localization as an implementation partner and as someone who, for their own countries, cannot really rely on Odoo to provide a complete localization. But first, allow me at least to quickly introduce myself, so at least you know who are you dealing with. My long story short is that my first experience with Odoo came in the year 2017. I was actually a project manager in Indonesia for one of the implementation partners there, and that partner also serves globally. So from then on, we actually moved to Vietnam and opened a branch under that implementation partner. And that will be story number one, because that's actually the first time we were working on an accounting localization for Vietnam. And after our Asian career ended, moved back to Europe, to Czech Republic, and now we have this year opened a new implementation partner in Czech Republic, where we have to go through all the struggles of accounting localization again. But to kick it off, what do you actually need to create an accounting localization if you are not Odoo? Usually you need just the three things: an accounting expert, an Odoo expert, and a reasonably good developer. And if you have all that, congratulations, just lock them in a room for a few months, and then the localization will happen, and that's it. But for those companies that don't have that, and I'm kind of guessing that there are a few of you in the room, what should you do if you don't have this available? And ultimately, it's also, of course, a question of time and money, not only the people that you have. So what can you do if this is not available, or at least not perfectly? Then that brings me up to the first story, because I will actually not be showing you Odoo. I will not be working with Odoo at all, because to discuss accounting localization in detail, half an hour is not enough time for that. So what I want to do here, at least, is to give you some inspiration, maybe some guidelines, maybe some, let's say, direction on if you're in the same role and you're in a country without accounting localization, what could be the priorities, what could be the approach of how to tackle that situation. And the story for me begins in Vietnam. And when we moved to Vietnam and we were actually doing a market research and talking to other partners and to Odoo and everything, we got a simple information. You don't have an accounting for Vietnam? You're done. You will never be able to kick off the company. It will never happen. But we said, okay, let's try anyway. We were crazy like that. It was a few years ago. And there were things like that. And of course, I don't speak Vietnamese. I'm not sure if I appear to do so, but I don't. So I started to see web pages like that for a first time, or I have started to see documents like this for a first time. And then suddenly it started to appear that, okay, that will not be so easy, at least not for me personally. But we managed to find a way how, firstly, even without accounting, we managed to find customers that were willing to use Odoo for other areas and just use, for example, exports, imports, even Excel exports, imports, to work with Odoo. But then we had to do something, because if we really wanted to scale and grow, to do it long-term without accounting, without having that in Odoo, that's not really feasible. So we actually did a few things. First, we were also lucky, and I will say that in full honesty. We are also lucky because we firstly got a customer who was willing to cooperate with us. And we were saying, honestly, I have no clue about Vietnamese accounting, but I understand Odoo and I have developers. So they were like, okay, we have great accountants and they have time. So we can actually offer you that know-how. And we, of course, arranged some sales deal that, of course, was beneficial also for the customer to do so. But then they told us, okay, we will give you the accounting knowledge, and we assume that you don't have it, so there will be also responsibility on the customer side for that. But then let's do what we need together. And from then on, we started to build, and we started to do the invoicing, and then we started to work on even stock valuation handling in accounting, which is a terrible story for a manufacturing company. But we went through that, and of course, we got to the legal statements. This is actually a Vietnamese balance sheet that even the numbers of accounts I still partially remember. And ultimately, we managed to start with one customer on a product that was far from complete, far from perfect. But it was enough for that customer. And even in terms of like the actual sales deal, we were not in loss out of that. And from then on, we actually had something we could show, even though it was not perfect. And we actually had a reference we could use, again, although they really helped us a lot on their own. And suddenly, we were in the market, and with every new customer, we started to improve and add, and then actually had our own internal roadmap of what to add and use, etc. But where it all began, and it began with the fact that it does not have to be perfect. And of course, in accounting, nothing ever is. Yeah, the systems change too often in various countries, but if there is not one company that actually needs everything covered that's there in the law, that's there in the regulation, because usually it depends on the industry, it depends on the size of the company, on the type of legal entity, and ultimately, to start with one company, you don't need to perfection. You just need to learn what they need and get that part done, and you can move on from there. Second, and that's related to it, it does not have to be complete. So as I mentioned, first customer, we started invoicing, we started stock valuation. We didn't even start with the accounting reports yet because they said, actually, we can do that manually. It will not change so much to begin with. So for the first months after even implementing the invoicing and everything, the legal reports, they still did manually. And for them, it was actually fine. But we were lucky that they were fine with that, but good customers can happen. Thirdly, and again, that's related to it, it's about satisfying the urgent needs, the must-haves, and bring value in that. And for as long as your price is not overdone and you will not invoice tens of man days for basic research, then the customer very often accepts it. And that's also, I will discuss in the story from Czech Republic, but the price-value ratio is the deal. And often you can find a reasonable compromise even with new customers on that topic. But most importantly, ultimately, and at least that's my personal approach that I like to stick to, but you should be honest and you should be transparent. Because if I would enter Vietnamese market saying, hey, we don't have accounting, but we will have it and everything will be great and perfect, just give us 1 month, we would probably fail. But we were honest about the fact that we don't have it, we want to have it, but also we don't have an accounting knowledge. And when we were transparent about that and saying fully honestly that we are also willing to compromise and cooperate and find the right deal to make it happen with you, even the customers, or at least some customers, start perceiving it as a risk and start perceiving it as a benefit, that they can actually work on the solution together with you. And that was me, and I'm sorry for that. And that was the beginning in Vietnam. And actually, then, as I mentioned in my introduction, after a few years in Vietnam, we moved to Czech Republic, and the similar situation there, at least 2 years ago, was basically the same. You could not even use Odoo to make invoices, legal invoices, because there were some regulatory requirements missing. Doing full accounting, completely impossible, and even the tax reports, etc., no way, not in base Odoo. So we were there basically, again, in the same situation. But since I already had the experience even from Vietnam, we managed to start working on it a little bit differently. But it was tough, because in Czech Republic, there is a terrible competition. This is just a few logos of accounting softwares that we have in Czech Republic. And there are many, many more of them. There are dozens of them, and every Czech accountant is used to them. When they say Czech accounting, they will immediately think Pohoda, or they will think Helios, and they will be like, oh, we need exactly what is there, and we need it in a way how it looks in those systems, and that's it. So that was actually a little bit different challenge, because I knew what I needed to do, but I also needed to break through the mindset of every system should have it. And in Czech Republic, we have dozens of systems that already handle accounting perfectly. So why should we work with you to put in Odoo? You should already have it, and you should have it the same as the already existing systems do it. But that's not really a good way. That would not really work. And why? Because the current systems look like this. And you might see some resemblance with the SAP screenshots that you have seen from Fabian yesterday. But this is actually, let's say, the #1, or definitely in the top 5 systems. This is one of them. And it looks like this. How do you want to do this in Odoo? Yeah? No way. So that was the challenge. And what we did together with our company is that first, we had to accept where we are. We have to, again, start from scratch. And there were other partners who were dealing with the same issue, but there was not much palpable and actually usable that we could reuse or do together. But we already knew our priorities. Priority one, make invoicing work. Accounting, full accounting, is actually used very rarely in all the implications, in all the areas that accounting covers. But every company needs to issue invoices. So goal one, make invoicing work. Goal two is make taxes work, because, and for that I don't mean only compute taxes on the invoice, but the actual tax reports and VAT compliance and everything that surrounds it. So that's step two. And with that, in total, we need to also make sure the financial reports are working. But having that, we can cover the basics and move on from there. And this is already enough for, I will throw out a random number. I can't say I have a valid statistics, but let's say for 80% of companies, Pareto rule is golden, of course. This will be enough to begin and to actually use Odoo efficiently. So this is what we said. Okay, we know we have to make this work, and then we can actually compare, at least be able to replace the local systems. So that's what we did, and it's actually still in progress. Like currently, I have a backlog for the tax reports. I wanted to finish them 2 weeks ago, and I got delayed by a trip to Egypt, but it's in the pipeline. And for us, we have already sold the invoicing to a few customers. They are using it, and we are actually collecting feedback and making improvements. And it's the feedback loop that, again, Fabian was describing in manufacturing that actually applies here, but the feedback loop is with our customers as implementation partner. But there are a few things you should answer for yourself if you are at the beginning of the journey, which is, do you want to implement or do you want to build a product? Because often when you start building, even for example, the invoicing workflow, of course you do it as an implementation. Usually you would sell your time and the time it takes to design and develop, etc., to deliver it for the customer. But then other companies which are more mature, for example, in their markets, etc., will say, okay, I will develop a full and proper accounting localization. I will sell it on a monthly subscription-based revenue basis, and I will grow from there. And maybe they will even actually guarantee full compliance, which is another level, but that's a different story. But this is something you have to decide first. Is the accounting localization actually something you want to take fully seriously and maybe build a proper product on top of it? Or do you actually want to cover the basics as an implementation, and that's enough, and you actually don't have the focus or priority to advance it? So make sure you know where you're heading. If you just work with one customer because it happened like that, you do something but you don't know what should be next, it's hard to build a strategy. It's actually hard to grow the implementation partner if you don't know what's your ultimate goal. So think if it's just something you want to use for ad hoc implementations, maybe the parts you will develop as for the localization, or if it's something that you really want to dedicate to as a product for yourself. Then it's actually a good idea to talk to Odoo, because I might have sounded a little bit harsh at the beginning saying in our country they don't have localizations, but it would not be completely precise to say they don't care. And even from my position, I understand Czech market, if they can focus on Indian market, is a completely different story. So I understand every developer has limited time, every person has limited time, and even Odoo has their priorities. But even here in Odoo experience, we met the product owner who's responsible for Czech localization. They are actually already improving some things to version 17 based on our feedback. So customers don't need to rely on our customization. They can have some things in base, and we'll just keep on providing the things that base Odoo does not have until the moment, hopefully in the future, when it will. But it's actually worth talking to Odoo, figuring out what are they doing, what are the priorities, what's in the pipeline, and maybe you will find out it's nothing, but there might actually be some benefits or things you will find out they will have. Like me, 2 weeks ago, I found out that they actually have a pull request for Czech financial statements for balance sheet and profit loss, and even the product owner thought it has already been deployed into the base code. It wasn't, and when I showed him the pull request, he was like, shit, that was supposed to be there already, so he promised to follow up, and suddenly I don't need to work on financial reports anymore because they will be there in a week or two. So those pleasant surprises, not too often, but can happen, and that's why it's good even to talk to Odoo about it. And then build your roadmap. For me, I have a very clear plan of what I'm working until the end of the year. I know what we can promise to customers, and I actually know what we don't cover, which will be mentioned a little bit later. But from all of that, as I mentioned, and I will repeat it because it is important, focus on the minimum viable product. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have everything. And for as long as you are aware of your gaps, for example, in Czech Republic, down payment invoices are a tricky topic. They are not entering bookkeeping, but then you have to report the taxes once you receive the down payment money, and it's a crazy topic. And there are a lot of cases even we are not covering yet because only few companies use those workflows or those specific scenarios of down payment handling. And I will probably involve them later, but I don't cover them now because they are complex, they are difficult. And I'm also talking to my customers in that way. Down payment invoices, yes, but this is not covered, this is not covered, this is what is covered. And when I'm honest and when I'm transparent like that, again, customers usually, in most cases, understand, and they are even more than happy then to provide the feedback and make sure they are part of the future improvements. It was mentioned by Odoo, it's mentioned by other partners, and I will mention it too. Do not over-customize. And even me, myself, I was here for the technical sessions for accounting reports and how they work technically and what can they do and how. And I have seen other partners who, when they start working on accounting localization, by default, they start to develop. And why do they start to develop? Usually it's because they want to replicate how things work in other accounting systems in their country. As I mentioned from my screenshot, that usually is a path to hell. So what I can recommend is do not over-customize. But how can you make sure you will not over-customize is actually by understanding Odoo. Without it, it's hard to know what it can do and how to achieve things through configuration. Then knowing what's the actual legal requirement, because the fact that accountants are used to something doesn't mean it's an actual legal requirement, and it doesn't mean it's something you actually need to handle. And from those 2 points, you can get to the third, that sometimes you will have to bash your head against the wall because, yes, accountants are, let's say, conservative people. And some are not, but majority. And if there are any accountants in the room and you are used to Odoo, let me know. I will be happy to promote you. But other than that, it's important to know that you will bash your heads against the wall because if you do things correctly, without customizing too much, without relying on the core of Odoo and using it efficiently and understanding what's the legal requirement and what are you skipping or leaving for later, etc., then you will find resistance in some accountants. But if you know all that, you can actually go through that. And when I'm talking to accountants in Czech Republic, even some who have been working for 20 years with the other softwares, and then I showed them Odoo and I explained. In Odoo, I do down payment invoice in this way. It's very different from what they are used to, but I did it because I can reduce the customizations by 50% compared to how other solutions do it. And when I then showed the whole workflow and applied, this legal requirement is covered here. This is actually easier in Odoo because here you have follow-ups, you have notifications and everything. And then the accountant was just silent after the end of the session, and I was worried, thinking like, okay, now she will say it's shit and I should just throw it to trash and just never do that again. And she was silent and I was like, so what do you think? And then the accountant was saying, that's actually pretty amazing. These things I need to do manually in the current accounting software. As I have no notifications, I need to book this manually, it's not automated, and here I can do it. And yes, it's different, but it's actually quite brilliant. And I was actually quite touched by that feedback because out of all my worries, I have realized that, again, many people are reasonable, and if you are able to explain why things were done in a certain way, then, and explain the musts and gaps and everything, then usually they will accept it and will actually learn to appreciate even the core of Odoo because it's years ahead of the traditional accounting softwares. So that would be the last key takeaway from the Czech story, and that's actually the last part of this talk. So feel free to ask anything, and of course I will be at the party. I'm the Czech person, and for those of you who don't know, Czech people have the largest beer consumption per capita per year, so I have to represent, so feel free to meet me at the party. But other than that, of course, I will be happy to answer any questions you have right now, or even if you need to discuss any technical or functional details related to Odoo and localizations, I will be more than happy to answer them. So thank you for your attention. Looking forward to your questions.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm Christian from Hungary. We are on the same road as you mentioned in Czech Republic. We just done the invoicing and we are working on a tax report and so on. You mentioned your product. What is your product when you said you developed basic localization and then you add your extra added value as a product? How does it work?
Currently, and I can actually try and show it, if I will be able to find it very quickly. Yes, over here. And it will be Czech language, but I will explain the key. So even the small things that we have already, we were able to price and we are actually able to sell as a product and even offer to the other partners. So here, just for you to understand, there is some basic core of the localization. There is integration to business registry called RS of Czech country. There was exchange rate download from Czech Central Bank because Odoo by default does not get exchange rates from Czech National Bank, so we added that. Here is exports of payments to bank, and here is the Czech invoices, including the down payment invoices and QR code. So those things we had, we were already able to package as even separate products, and then put a price on it and just offer it on the market. And that's like the first step, because we don't have everything. But ultimately, we would like to reach the state, and it might take a year or two, but I'm quite certain we can get there, where we will not need to sell it separately like this, but we can actually say, here is a complete accounting localization, this is the money, you can actually even get maintenance contract on that for this money, and have it as a complex and more complete solution. So it's part of the roadmap question and knowing what will be done and where and which functionalities you can actually package off and maybe sell. But ultimately, for us, even for us, the goal is to have it as a one complete and full product. Hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Did you have to implement Python code to modify Odoo behavior, or was the data enough, like chart of account, reports, taxes?
I'm sorry, the first part, did we have to implement what exactly?
Python code.
Python code.
Yeah.
Yes, we needed to use Python code. Actually, not even so much for the reports, and with the new changes in version 16 and then 17, even the exports to XML can be done without Python module. You can make it as a custom engine or custom expression. But for us, related to the invoicing, it's full proper custom modules with Python. There was no other way, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay, same for me with tile localization. So it leads me to my second question. If yes, what was the important things to watch to not break Odoo and still be multi-company compatible?
Mm-hmm. I'll be honest, we still broke Odoo a little bit because I had to do things, as I mentioned. Down payment invoice in Czech Republic is specific. It does not enter bookkeeping. It does not book the income or the tax value, etc. But I still wanted to make sure that even though it should not be booked, that our customers can use the functionality that's on top of the down payment invoice that you can create from sales order, and then you can control the due date and see it everywhere and reconcile it, etc. So we actually broke Odoo a little bit and played with the way how the bookings are done, and we made some changes so the down payment invoice is actually booked for the off-balance accounts instead of the official balance accounts. And that was tricky. We did actually have to remove a lot of validations that the core of Odoo has, and we needed to test it very properly to make sure we didn't break anything important. And we had to accept it. It's a trade-off. I mean, if you can find a better solution, come talk to me, we can discuss it. But it can happen, and if you're one of those countries where you know there is no easy way, at least know that there is no other way and be able to explain why you do it.
looks like we have a couple questions in the pad as well.
Okay, it was, I think, the question, did you need to bend base Odoo a lot to achieve Czech invoicing localization, about editing fields and PDFs? So for the final invoice, no, it was minor changes, and that can be actually done with Studio or even without custom modules. For the down payment invoices, yes, because the impacts into the bookkeeping were quite significant, and we needed to bend that quite a bit. But for the taxes, actually, don't need to bend it almost at all, because with the tax grids functionality that's in base Odoo and the impacts it has for tax reports, etc., it can actually work with proper configuration. Like 90% of what you need, you can get with proper configuration. Yes, the Python code, that was also answered. How do you maintain the localization package best practice-wise? It's a good question, because we're still, at least in Czech Republic, we're still basically in the beginning phases, but that's where it starts. And even for us, when I'm designing all the products that you could have seen that I explained, when I'm doing the design of how to implement it, I am already including the sources of based on what the request comes. And there can be legal paragraphs of law, there can be links to, let's say, for example, the integration documentation of the business registry, and I input the sources, and I also input the frequency of review. So I know we can guarantee if there is some change, we can catch it in time, etc. So if during your initial design you take care to list what's the source of the requirement, where does it come from, how often to review it, you can actually build internal process and then have analysts, for example, look monthly at the spreadsheet or project task in Odoo and just execute and look for changes. And if there is a change, escalate it so we can implement it in the localization. And if you do this from the beginning, it's really about a strict process that you will follow and make sure you implement whatever is found. And that's probably the best recommendation I can give. Of course, it's good to have an accountant, skilled person in your company or externally available, because they can usually monitor the law a bit better than us Odoo consultants only. But ultimately, it's more about having this planned and scheduled and implemented internally in your company. Which benefits your company have in improving the Odoo localization, making yours de facto obsolete? It's quite a bit related to the maintenance and the upgrades and everything, because if it's in base Odoo, then I don't need to invest my human resources into making sure it works in new versions. I don't need to deal with it during upgrade projects for customers, and I can focus on other things that bring added value to my customers. And yes, I could say I will finish my localization, I will sell it for 5,000 euro, and I will not offer it anywhere else, but we're still Odoo Community. Ultimately, if you don't want to be part of the community and you want to just do things for yourself, then probably Odoo is not the best product for you. So it's honestly our approach, and it's related to that. We want to make sure the customers have as easy life as possible. So I'm happy to offer what we have to Odoo. I'm happy to discuss with Odoo and make sure things get implemented in base, because it makes my life easier, it makes customers' life easier, and I can focus on providing value in other areas where I can actually benefit the customer. Okay, I'm guessing time for last question, which is how do you colleague feedback back reports from clients? Do you guarantee legal correctness? So legal correctness, as of right now, we don't guarantee. And we mention it in our contract conditions that if a customer finds out something is not according to law and they will report it to us, we will implement it or we will fix it, but we don't proactively guarantee legal compliance as of right now. And it's up to customer to evaluate that if it suffices or not. And for the reporting, it's very simple. We have an email alias, an Odoo form, and customers simply report things through those, and it creates tasks in Odoo project automatically, and we get notifications, and we can work on that. So with Odoo, that is luckily super easy.
Thank you so much for your talk.
Pleasure. Thank you for being here.